I'm recording this church leader tool toward the beginning of 2017, very much thinking about those New Year's resolutions that we make. And one of them often, especially for leaders, is to deepen our prayer life. So I thought I would share this church leader tool on the prayers of a leader. So a couple of thoughts as we deepen our prayer life as leaders. First, when we pray, it puts our work in God's hands. It's a way of handing over and deepening our relationship with God for the work that we have, the responsibilities we have, into God's hands. I love the way that Abraham Lincoln shared this. He wrote one time, "I have been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and that of all about me seemed insufficient for the day." Abraham Lincoln knew about being dependent on God. And when we pray, this is what happens. We force ourselves, we remind ourselves of how dependent we are on God. Really, in another way, it helps to bring God's power and God's wisdom and God's direction into our lives. It helps us feel that partnership we need for whatever our responsibilities are. That certainly works privately, but it also works in our prayers with and by others. I can remember one time in my life when I had a great responsibility weighing before me. It was to lead the funeral of the pastor who had preceded me in that particular congregation. And a member of the congregation came in and prayed for me in that responsibility. And that was so powerful to have them pray for me and strengthen me. A great reminder of this as well, in a famous way, was that Charles Spurgeon, that great English preacher, was asked one time about his great success. And his answer to that question was, "My people pray for me." He felt and knew the power of prayer of others for him. So I should also note as well that when we're in prayer, it's also a time to listen to God, not just to ask God, hand things over to God, get the strength, get the wisdom that we need from God, but it's also a chance to listen to God, to feel and to listen for that still small voice of God's direction in whatever our leadership responsibilities are. And I should also note that does not take away our responsibility to lead. We don't hand over everything to God completely and just say, "Well, God, you've all got it." We pray and we lead. There's that famous quote, I think it's mostly attributed to St. Augustine, to pray as though everything depended on God and then work as though everything depended on us. There's that duality of that work that God does and then also the responsibility that we have to lead well. So let me cover then just a couple of things that we might pray about, some prayers that leaders could offer. Certainly, prayers for faith and trust. Our faith needs to be deepened just as much or more than anybody else's so that we're fully dependent and trusting on God. So pray that your own faith would be deepened. Pray for strength in your call. Pray for that knowledge and that sense that, God, you are deepening the ministry that you have put before me. You're strengthening that call that you have given me to lead in whatever way you're called. Certainly to pray for wisdom and vision for that path in front of you, for whatever the specific needs that you have to lead well and effectively in your particular situation. Certainly praying for strength, praying for physical strength, for spiritual strength, praying for courage. Whatever the strength you need for any particular day is a great prayer. And it's also okay to pray for resources. Maybe that's financial resources in your congregation. Maybe that's material resources. A lot of times I think that praying is in people resources. Lord, help me to find or to get to know some people who have particular skills. Or Lord, you've really blessed me with some gifted leaders. Keep them healthy. Watch over them. Help their leadership to be strong and effective. So pray for those resources that you need. One way to think about prayers, I love the list I came across one time from the great leader John Maxwell. He had a list of prayers of things that he wanted that he saw in biblical characters. And what's great about this is when you pray in this way, you remember how God gave these gifts to different people in the Bible, and as God gave those gifts to them, you pray for that yourself. So you could pray for the faith of Abraham, that he packed up, took everything that he had and headed in a new direction, because that's what God required of him. You could pray for the leadership of Moses, all the challenges that Moses had leading the Israelites to safety in the promised land out of Egypt. You could pray for the courage of Daniel. We all know that story of Daniel in the lion's den and the courage and the faith that Daniel expressed. We could pray for the heart that David had, a man after God's own heart, to pray for that kind of a heart for God as David had. We could pray for the wisdom that Solomon, who could ask anything of God, but who asked for wisdom. We could pray for the perseverance like Job had, and to receive that perseverance as Job did. We could pray for the passion that Paul had, all the travels and all the work that Paul did in his ministry. Or we could pray for the compassion, for the love that Jesus had. All throughout the scriptures, we see these different gifts that people had, and we can pray for those same things. Well, I hope this has been helpful to just draw you into a deeper prayer life, and as always, I hope you will share this with somebody you know who needs to maybe grow, or you'd encourage them in their prayer life in a brand new year. Take care and God bless.